Yona and I are actually both only 40 years old. I don't care what that mathematics would add up to. And that in 1978, all right, it's true. So my specialty is Israel, Israeli defense, security, the decisions, the innovative styles that Israel has. If you've ever been to a planning meeting, or sometimes what they call in the intelligence and security business a post-mortem, even if nobody died, and there's an Israeli there, often everybody else stops and listens to the Israeli. It's like that old TV commercial by one of the investment firms, right? When an Israeli Mossad guy speaks, everybody stops and listens. But why would that be? The assumption almost of great expertise. And why would that be? Because of bitter experience. That's what everybody feels they know about Israel, that Israel has learned a lot by having been attacked a lot. And by usually not taking it lying down and having a lot of countermeasures, as Yonah Alexander puts it in genteel terms. Countermeasures can include trying to plant your own agents inside terrorist groups, and it also can include use of assassinations. And also when finding and identifying a training camp of an organization, sending your country's Air Force to bomb that camp again and again. Something that the United States tried to do from time to time before 9/11, including after the attack on embassies in Africa, so there was some U.S. retaliation. Well, that's been in what you might call the Israeli playbook for many years. So as I say, bitter experience and also taking action. That's kind of the combination of where Israel is in this area of expertise, terrorism and counterterrorism. But still, often it's a case of shutting the barn door after the horses have bolted, or in a more professional term, coming up with countermeasures for the last attack. Right? It's only after you discover that an al-Qaeda offshoot group in Europe was planning to mix liquids on aircraft and thus blow many of them up. A suicide attack, by the way, that would be. Only since then have we not been allowed to take more than 3.5 ounces of liquid on an airplane afterward, after finding out what they were up to. Now, luckily, in that case, the British intelligence had been watching that group and does a lot of eavesdropping and a lot of monitoring. And according to British officials, I'm sure you've heard this at other seminars here at the Potomac Institute, the British say they're following thousands of people and thousands of possible plots all the time. And now the Olympics land on their front door. Okay, so the British are reaching out and having planning meetings, and have had them for years, not just the last weeks or months, but for years. And it has included Americans, and it has included Israelis. It's not really spoken of, but again, maybe some of you living in the Washington, D.C. area have heard of people who work for organizations in the U.S. government that often don't talk about their work, but that man or woman is away in London for about a month. Yes, someone from the U.S., DIA, CIA, Homeland Security, etc., NSA. Yes, they're in London because the British, as smart as they are, as numerous as they might be, as experienced as the British are, also as people who have withstood a lot of terrorism, the British also reached out for international support. You should. The Olympic Games is an international event. You're going to have an incredible number of people visiting, the athletes, the officials of the Olympic teams of each of the countries, tourists, visitors, ticket holders, ticket scalpers, pickpockets, all sorts of international types. Suddenly on the streets of London, it's no surprise the British would reach out, and they have done so. When I mentioned that the Israelis have their bitter experience, well, specifically with Olympic Games. 40 years ago, Munich, 1972, Palestinian terrorists, in order to get attention for their demands, took Israeli athletes hostage, and by the end of that day, 11 Israeli athletes were dead. The Munich Olympics massacre. If one looks for political purposes, again, as I suggested, the terrorists were from the PLO. They called themselves Black September. It was just a masquerading kind of name. Black September was really commanded, I would tell you, at the top by Yasser Arafat. And Black September did it. Arafat wanted to get attention all over the place. 1972 was only 5 years after the Six-Day War. Only 5 years after the Israelis captured the West Bank and Gaza, and this Palestinian movement was just starting to kind of find its feet. And in that time period, it decided mainly to be a violent movement. Black September refers to September 1970, when there was a civil war in Jordan, and the Palestinians, the Arafat forces, narrowly were defeated. There was some help from the U.S. and Israel to support King Hussein in Jordan. So you could see a choosing of sides. And the Palestinians, again, decided to be militant, violent, aim even against civilians. But even at the Munich Olympics, their target was athletes, representatives they might have felt of the state of Israel that they hated so much. They were not attacking the spectators. A lot of the security at the Olympics, in every set of games since then, Winter Olympic Games and summer, I've been at quite a few of them as a news reporter, the security was for the whole thing, for the whole event, for everything about it, as though even the fans might be attacked, even the host city might be attacked. Not an assumption that it's going to be the athletes again, or the athletes of Israel, or the athletes of any particular country. To the best of my knowledge, spectators were never attacked until Atlanta in 1996, the Summer Olympic Games in Atlanta. I was just 200 feet away. What? There was a James Brown concert, one of those free concerts at the Summer Olympics. The music was so loud that people weren't even sure that they had heard anything in the Olympic Park that was nearby, and we were sort of the House of Blues that was nearby, a temporary location. But I can tell you that my beeper went off, and we did start having message beepers. No cell phones in '96, at least CBS News hadn't gotten them. Wow. And my beeper, however, said what it was. Bomb at Olympic Park, call into the New York desk right away. And I was with a group of about 6 friends, and so I told them, I think you should leave. There's probably about to be a lot of panic. I'd rather not tell you exactly why, but the truth is I don't know exactly why. So my friends left, and I got to work, and all night, and there you were. I mean, civilians had been attacked. People in the park. A bomb had gone off. Suspicion was wrongly cast on one particular security guard, and the international news media all parked outside his apartment because Richard Jewell refused to admit to police that he was guilty. Well, that's because he wasn't guilty. And as you heard earlier, Eric Rudolph, who was better known for a bomb aimed at abortion clinics, was, in the end, found to be responsible for the bomb that killed, as I recall, 2 people, one immediately, one later, at the Olympic Park in Atlanta. Well, it meant that sports fans were attacked, and they weren't even ticket holders. It was just, a big public event in the park. And that meant that now the security perimeter defined for any such event would not just be the stadium, it would not just be the parking lot around the stadium, it would have to go much bigger. Well, how big do you go? That neighborhood, in the case of London, that would mean Greenwich, East London, Stratford, etc. Or all of London has to have a security alert? Can you afford it? You heard mention of money earlier from David. Money is a big part of it. Now, in the Israeli model, you don't hear much about money. That may surprise you. The Mossad and the other agencies of Israeli security and intelligence, Shin Bet for domestic security, also experts on counterterrorism. They do a lot of work outside Israel. And the Army intelligence, Amman, also a lot of people, more than 10,000 people, because they're in uniform. The budget's already covered, you might say. They don't worry about budget too much. When I was doing a lot of interviews and research for my book, I never really heard about the expense. It was assumed, and always has been by Israel, that it is a target country, that its leaders feel that it's a small country with its back against the wall, that it has enemies, that the surrounding Arab countries plus Persia, Iran, in general hate Israel. So there's a lot of danger, so it's part of life. The intelligence community there even has a special wing, always had special units for immigration. No, not the U.S. style, in order to prevent immigration. Israel had special units to promote immigration, to bring Jews in from all over the world. That was to build up the country. So again, Israel's intelligence community has always been special, yet once in a while, it has these liaisons, these events where they work together with the rest of the world. I would tell you the Israelis are different. We mentioned already that when the Israeli in the meeting speaks, everybody listens. Because they have something different at stake. They've handled it differently. It's their top priority. Terrorism in a country of 7 million people with just 2 major cities, Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, it can be extremely disruptive, even as the Israelis have proved themselves to be unusually resilient, that after a suicide bombing, that pizzeria is open as soon as possible. That street market is open again, sometimes within hours after a suicide bombing. True, they're tough cookies, the Israelis. But when they get together with foreigners and they help plan something going on in London, for instance, you might say the Israelis kind of have to tone it down a little bit, right? Dial it down and speak at the level that everyone else can understand. The domestic British security MI5, and yes, MI6 with a lot of foreign-based information is involved with this, and every part of British intelligence. And as I mentioned, the Americans are there, and it means that the intelligence services of all the major countries are there. Yes, even the Russians and even the Chinese, mainly to protect their own team, but the Israelis often are also involved with the general Olympic security because of their bitter experience in Munich and their experience since then. Well, you know what the basics are. Anyone who knows anything about police work, would know that you want to have as much intelligence as you can in advance. And so the Israelis add what they've heard, what they know, the chatter they've heard to the mix, intelligence in advance. You want to have observation of the arrivals. You want to watch Heathrow Airport and the British ports, etc., just to see if there's some odd pattern, odd-looking groups coming. And the Israelis generally would plead guilty if you accuse them of looking at types of people, profiling, right, which is not PC here in this country at all. Israelis do profiling, not just by how you look, but how you behave, where you've been. Do you look like fidgety? That's why you get asked those questions if you fly to or from Tel Aviv. Why are you flying? What's going on? They're not really interested in what aunt or uncle you're visiting. They're really looking to see if you look fidgety, suspicious, uncomfortable. They're trained at that. So we mentioned intelligence well in advance, watching the arrivals, security perimeters at the event itself. Israelis are good at that. A lot of Israeli companies have invented many, many devices, surveillance in the form of cameras, all sorts of monitoring gear, etc. A lot of countries are now developing equipment like that, but the Israelis were way out ahead. Again, they would tell you they had to be. And then the Israelis have their ability to shoot back. Now that's on scene, and so it's up to the British, how many of their officers are going to be armed. You've probably seen an unusually large number are this week. Usually the London Bobby does not even have a gun. There are a lot of officers who have been trained in the use of guns who are serving that function around the Olympics in London at this time. I lived in London for 12 and a half years, by the way. I was happy to have the nice Bobby down the street, but increasingly with Irish terrorism and then Arab terrorism, and then a Libyan embassy siege in which a woman police officer was shot dead. Some Libyan from the window of the embassy shot that woman police officer. More and more British cops got armed, and so you have to think about that ability to shoot back on the scene, crowd control if something unusual like that's about to happen, plan for crowd control, capture the attacker or attackers, have a place to bring them, have that planned. Where's your brig? Where's your personal? Where's your local convenient jail cell? Probably at every Olympic facility hidden there is some room with iron bars, and the plan is that's where someone would be locked up if they did something wrong, seriously or otherwise. Liaise with local law enforcement in the usual way, but in this case also with the military. A huge number of British military are involved in this, but you know why in part? Because a private security company, G4S, which is a publicly listed company with billions of dollars of revenue each year, couldn't handle their contract. They got a contract from the Olympic organizers for more than $450 million to have lots and lots of guards, and G4S only admitted about 2.5 weeks ago that they couldn't cope. A big embarrassment for the Olympic organizers in London and also for the British government, though at least they could turn immediately to the army. But those soldiers weren't trained for the things I've just been saying right now. Watching the arrivals, perimeter security, shooting back on scene. Hurried training? Not exactly ideal. I hope nothing happens, but you have troops filling in for what should have been specifically trained people that G4S, this commercial company, was going to provide. That didn't work out. G4S did not supply nearly enough people. So you have some problems, you have some challenges, you have some unique Israeli solutions. I'm sure bottom line, the Israelis hope nothing happens. One final point, there was a little mention earlier of media hype and how that happens. I guess it does. I don't plead guilty on that. But the Sunday Times of London last Sunday had a front page item that said Hezbollah and Iran might attack the Olympics. Israel sounds the alert, and the London Organizing Committee, LOCOG, is all excited about it and worried. Hezbollah and Iran might attack the Olympics. I don't think so. I told you the basic reason that the PLO Black September attacked the Munich Olympics in '72 to get attention. I don't think there's any way that Iran and Hezbollah want to attack that sort of target. They prefer so-called soft targets. Ellen said that athletes and sports are soft targets. Well, not in the Olympic Games when you have thousands of soldiers, etc. No, there are far softer targets like buses of tourists who just arrived in Bulgaria. And so you might get things like that happening now, anytime, during the Olympics, not during the Olympics. There is a shadow war continuing between Iran and Israel. In the background is Iran's nuclear program that Israel is determined to stop. That's the big background. In the meantime, we hope that the Olympics go smoothly and peacefully. Thank you.